Well, hello there. Welcome to the check-in. I hope you're doing great, wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is in the world, wherever you are. Apologies for the never-ending loop of aviation racket. So in this video I'm going to talk about memories, actually, sort of childhood, and sort of reflecting back on some things as an adult. And so this is encompassing things like reminiscence and elements of sort of cloudy, judgmental, or cloudy, foggy memories. This video will focus on the 1990s, as that was the decade in which I grew up. Well, the 90s and the early 2000s, actually, but most of my memories were formed in the 90s as a child, because really my childhood was in the mid to late 90s. By the time the early 2000s, I was pretty much a teenager. But regardless, it was a fascinating time. But next year I'm going to be 30 years old. By the way, thank you for checking with me today. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch my videos. It really does mean a lot to me, so thank you. If you hear any noise in the background, it's because my friend Dang is having a drinking session and playing some games. So I think we can forgive him for that, considering he's in his early 20s. And it is Friday night after all, so anyway. So this is another one of those reflections in the dark videos. And I hope you enjoy it. I hope you can take something from this video in some way, in whatever way that might be for you. Whether it's just entertainment, whether it's just something to watch, something to listen to, seeing as there's nothing really to watch, but or maybe there's something in this that resonates with you in some way or other. So anyway, next year I'm going to be 30 years old. And of course 30 is relatively young really in these days, because people now are living to more or less, certainly in the developed world, certainly in Europe and in the United Kingdom, generally speaking, people tend to reach the 70s and 80s. So, being 30 years old is still relatively young, I guess. But of course 30 years old is young to someone that's 60, and 30 years old is old to someone that's 10. So it's all kind of relative, I guess, depending on comparisons and also just how you feel, I guess, to some extent as well, because a number doesn't have to determine what you are, what you should be at a certain point in your life. Although I think there are certain milestones perhaps that one should maybe have achieved by a certain stage, but that's not necessarily to to set deadlines by an age or anything. You know, by 30 you should have had this done, or by 40 you should have had this, or by 20 you should have had this done in your life, or whatever. I don't really believe in that kind of thing. I certainly believe in being ambitious and having goals and aiming to change in positive ways, and to do things that I believe are important. Perhaps, you know, starting and raising a business, or, you know, being the best that you can possibly be within your chosen career or job. You know, maybe trying to get a promotion, get a pay rise, having, you know, starting a family, having children, raising children, being a good role model as a father, and, you know, perhaps doing some other things that can help in other parts of the world in the process, if you have the money to spare, you know. But in general, I don't think that a number has to define you in any way, shape or form. I think it can be embarrassing to be in a dead-end job by the time you're 40, 50, or to perhaps not have saved enough for your retirement by the age of 50 or something like that, perhaps. But so I'm going to be 30 next year, and I guess that is still fairly young, but it doesn't feel feel like, I don't feel 29 now. I feel older than that. And of course people say those kind of things all the time, but I sometimes just feel worn out in life. I just feel exhausted, and I haven't really done much with my life in the grander scheme of things, really. Not because I haven't done anything by a certain age or anything like that. It's nothing to do with that. But I certainly would have. I just wish I wish that I had done some things earlier. I wish I had done some things like gain an education and get a degree, or get 2 degrees and a master's degree or honours degree or whatever. And maybe to have had children, which I still don't have, in my earlier 20s maybe, but I'm sort of going off topic here really. But it just feels like a bit of a milestone, reaching 30, and I'm not exactly sure why that is. I guess it's, for the last year or so, it's been a heavy focus on my childhood, a lot of heavy reflection on my teens, and trying to sort of sift through all the delusional sort of tunnels of perception on what I think my past was and what it actually was. I think there's a big difference between, well, I think it's very difficult to explain. And quite often in my life I have a lot of fleeting memories, fleeting thoughts, and not often I don't write down those kind of things, and it's a real shame, because there's so much insight I could have gained into so much stuff I've written it down, but I've lost so many different ideas and even inventions, actually. Just thought, not that any of it, but maybe some of it might have been interesting or useful, I'm not sure, but I just wish I'd have written some stuff down. But it does feel a bit like a milestone. I don't know why. It's just that a round number, reaching around, and it was kind of the same when I was 20 as well. Well, reaching 20. But the difference between 19 and 29 is that at 19 I was still transitioning. I wasn't even really transitioning. I was very much a sort of an adult teen, really, a grown-up teenager, I guess you could say, or an overgrown teenager, overgrown child. And in some ways I haven't lost that, and in some parts of my mind and my personality, I still see some pieces of that 19-year-old lad. But the biggest difference is that now at 29 there's much more emphasis on responsibility and a sense of just time running out more quickly than it did at 19. And I think that'll be the case as I reach 40. I think at every point where you're finishing one period of your life, because to me a life is kind of a bit like a long breakup. You know, you sort of get settled into things and you get used to a certain aspect of your life, a certain level of stability, and it changes, and you know, things sort of divert off all over the place. Life's sort of a bit like setting a firework off. You know, you stick it in the ground, you aim for a specific spot, but you know, then the wind comes and throws it off course and goes in a completely different direction than you hoped it would. Sometimes it's dangerous, and sometimes sometimes it pans out in a way, and sometimes it's catastrophic. It's very easy to look back at something and see it in a way that we think that it was as the way we thought it was as a child or as a teenager or whatever age it was. Of course, looking back at the 90s as a 29-year-old now, you know, I was just a child then, and some people that watch this might have been a child during that decade, or maybe have been an adult, or perhaps an adult during that time. And of course there would be some massive differences, and to some extent we're all living this life of this constant edge of not wanting to shatter our perception, our illusions of things. And I think that is the reality, is that we're all living in some illusionary sort of world and lifestyle or life that we've created. And we do things all the time and we participate in things, and we build worldscapes inside our heads about how we think things are. And, you know, we look at people every day that we walk past. We judge people based on how they look at us and the tone of voice, the body language. You know, we're just constantly in a state of judgment. And I guess in some ways, perhaps, looking back on the 1990s, certainly as a child, it was an incredible time to be alive, because there was just it just seemed, as a child at least, from what I can remember of it, to be, I don't know, it just seemed to be less serious than it is now. Certainly in England, certainly where I came from in England, in East Yorkshire. Of course, that's just one small part of the world, a tiny dot on the map, and you know, a whole multiverse of activity. So, it's a bit of an exaggeration, but you know, there's obviously a trillion different things of going on at the same time for every day that I was, you know, a child during that time. And it's hard, you can't say that it was a great time, because it might have been a great time for you, but even if it was the same country, wherever, the same school, whatever it is. Everybody's experiences of something are, there might be some similarities, but I would say overall that they're very different. Even people that were perhaps with you in certain moments, whether it was in a club or whether it was in a bar or a college, university, whatever it was, there's going to be similarities between things, because there's obviously things that were universal and common throughout more or less all decades, in terms of values and trends in fashion and music, general attitudes. But growing up during that time, for me, it just seemed to be very special and very magical. And I've just been thinking a lot about that recently, and I was thinking about why I still cling on to that. Why is it I'm so sort of desperate to reignite those memories in a way, almost sort of wanting to go back to them. But then I sometimes think, well, I sometimes get a sort of a moment of clarity, I guess. It's almost like I'm just living in a dream a lot of the time in my life. I just feel like I'm wandering around in a constant haze and mist of just never really quite being here in the moment, never really experiencing or really fully understanding, appreciating anything until moments that have gone and you can't get back and you wish you could. I don't think it's necessarily that, certainly for me, that I certainly miss elements of the 90s, and as a child at least, it was so many gadgets and technology, the rise of the internet, even though it's in its infancy. There's just the excitement of the millennium, the excitement of this sort of new world that was coming, but people knew it was coming, but wasn't quite sure exactly what it was going to be like. And yet there was still a lot of traditions and just a lot of things that it's very, very difficult to explain what it was like in many ways. It was definitely shitter in certain aspects. And I was thinking about that just today, about what was it really like? Because if you went back now as an adult, what would it be like? Even just to go back as a child, to re-experience something, would it be the same? Would you have a completely different experience? Could it be possible to even have the same experience? Would you have, even as a child, would you have a new sense of clarity over it? Would it be even better than you thought it was because you got another second chance to go back? Or would it be worse because you've already experienced it before, and then you're placing expectations on it again, and the expectations aren't met? I don't know. It'd be very interesting to see what would come of that. I mean, what would be the point anyway? What just for some selfish desire? I think that's in some ways. I think it is a selfish thing to want stability for too long, because life changes and things change all the time. And I'm not saying that we should live in a constant state of instability, but we all need some level of a foundation, of grounding, things to keep us down to earth and humble to a certain level. But at some point, like I said earlier, life's a bit like a constant breakup. At some point you just have to learn to let go, and it's not like I haven't let go, and I have, but sometimes it's almost like a magnet. Something in my mind is just just feel like going back, and it's stubborn and it's naive and it's just a dream, really, a delusion. But that being said, I mean, that there is some things that were better. In my opinion, of course, it's all subjective, and in some ways I think that even the commercial pop music, where a lot of it was very cringy and repetitive, some of that was, even when you listen to some of the stuff today from the 90s, it still sounds fresh and new, exciting. The content of the song, the lyrics, is more fun, it's just less serious. And as you went into the 2000s period, things just seemed to just disappear and become very, very poisonous. Discriminatory songs and politics, money, sex, everything. Not like the 90s was completely free of that stuff. It was very much, in the world of rap at least, and pop music still, about some of that, but now there's even more reliance upon it. I just think that there's nothing is perfect and nothing ever will be perfect. And on the topic of politics, there will never ever be a perfect solution. I don't care how many times new people get elected, or supposedly new forms of government or types of governance. It will never completely work. It'll always be corrupted. Money corrupts. But having said that, being wealthy can corrupt you, and being poor and being famine can corrupt you as well. The rich are their own worst enemies, and the poor are their own worst enemies. So in some ways they're actually different sides of the same coin, really. But the 90s was just an incredible time to experience, and I kind of wish I could have had the chance to be a teenager or an adult during that time, or even before that, to see the 80s, even the 70s would have been very, very, just an incredible, amazing time in so many different ways. You know, the individuality of those decades, the push to do something different and be controversial. It just seemed to be such much more of a sense of fun. And the world's become, in some ways, more enclosed, and that's probably due to the rise of the superpowers of the computer and technology, and the things that the microchip can do now. You know, it's things are just becoming smaller and smaller, and it being over here, you see it even more over here, the reliance on technology and a real sense of addiction, internet addiction. I'm not saying that I'm not free, that I'm not I've not fallen victim to, because I have. But because the internet was still very much very much in its infancy during the 90s, it wasn't relied upon as much, and it wasn't, people weren't addicted to it. Certainly not that I can remember. Things were much slower still, and in some ways that's good that we live in the world we live in today, because things are much faster now. So in some ways the world's perhaps, it's more efficient now because it's quicker and things can be done faster, and so you save time. But I kind of wish that it was still in sometimes in like it was in the past. I think now it's just a case of it's all about me 24/7. You know, people buying things for the sake for the sake of buying them. It's not even a fashion trend anymore. It's just a case of something to do, to take a picture, to put on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. It's just become such a selfish world, such a selfish society of just this constant need for attention and being validated, having your opinions validated all of the time. Just a platform for overblown egos. You know, people that have obviously got issues, parenting issues, and you see it in the children. As much as the 90s was probably one of the worst decades in some ways, economically speaking, and in terms of popular music, it was still a shitload better than it is today. In many ways, in terms of creativity, I think it was probably the last decade, in my opinion, of real individuality. I think that the early 2000s was dominated with the obsession and paranoia of terrorism and security, and I think it's because of that mostly the world is the way it is now. I don't know how long I've got left on this planet, but in some ways, sometimes I kind of wish that I don't have too much longer, because it just seems to be becoming more miserable. It's just so much self-loathing and self-obsession. And of course that existed it always existed, but not to the state it's in now. Reminiscing is useful, as it can give you a chance to see the reality of, to push aside what you think, what you think was the reality, but in fact the reality was very different. And unfortunately that can take decades to understand and fully comprehend. As I reach 30, I seem to long more and more for the past. And I have no doubt that will continue as time goes forward, moves on. But in other ways, I'm kind of glad that I'm where I am now. I'm kind of happy being who I am. As in many ways, I didn't really know myself for a very long time. And I certainly didn't know myself when I was a child or even a teenager. It took a long time to get where I am. And I'm certainly not exactly where I would like to be. But hopefully I've got somewhat of a longer stretch yet to develop that, and we'll see what happens. Good night. Take care, guys. See you soon. Thanks for checking in with me today. Let's check out. And I'll see you in the next video. See you guys. Bye-bye.